After facing the most powerful enemy, this guy decides to enroll in a hero school just to socialize. That's right, all he wants is to make some friends. It all seems pretty cool, except the first friend he actually makes in this place is also the top student of the school, and everyone is afraid of her for some reason. What no one knows is that she hides a big secret. In a devastated place, we see the Demon King giving that classic villain speech, saying he'll destroy the world if the hero can't stop him. The boy named Blade pulls a stone with his foot and holds it in his hand, preparing to face the enemy's attack, who moves a giant rock toward the hero. Blade throws the little stone with immense force, enough to collide head-on with the huge rock and stop the attack. After that, the boy tells the demon to stop holding back so they can fight for real, going all out. The enemy accepts, and they both activate their abilities, clashing multiple times and destroying the surrounding scenery even further. Sometime later, they are both exhausted. For some reason, the hero's hair, which was black, turned white. They approach each other and exchange the final blows before falling to the ground. Blade is relieved because the final confrontation is finally over. The image zooms out and we see that they are lying in the middle of a large crater that formed during the battle. Next, we see the entrance to a school that looks more like a castle. The students greet each other as they enter the building, and among them, Blade observes the behavior of the young people, eager to make friends and become a regular person. We also notice that his hair is now half white and half black. He walks cheerfully through the corridor, saying hello to everyone. A group of 4 students recognizes that there's a funny newcomer at the school. He approaches this group and introduces himself as Blade to each of them. When the boy mentions that he wants to make friends, one of the girls asks if he wants to be friends with them. Of course, the boy is very happy, saying that he now has 4 friends and his goal is to reach 100. In the midst of this conversation, a red-haired girl arrives, commenting on the behavior of the group that is making a certain noise in the corridor. One of the other guys mentions that this girl is called Ernest Flaming, one of the top students, so everyone calls her Empress. Without wasting time, Blade goes over there and introduces himself in his friendly manner. The redhead comments that she's never seen him before, so the others explain that he's a new student. Ernest tells Blade that this academy only admits students who want to become heroes to protect the world, and it's not common for someone to enter so late. However, Blade reveals that he's not interested in becoming a hero and just wants to make friends. This makes the girl very angry, but he reminds her that he needs to go to the principal's office and asks her to show him the way. Ernest goes with him, and when they enter, they see a bearded man to whom the redhead bows when she recognizes who he is. Blade, on the other hand, approaches more casually even as the girl tries to stop him. She asks the boy if he knows who this person is, and Blade replies that he does. The redhead apologizes, calling the man Your Majesty. In any case, the man is calm and smiling. He reveals that the former principal told him about her, saying that from this day on, he will be the new director of the academy. The girl is thrilled at the prospect of receiving lessons from His Majesty, who was once a great warrior, but never imagined she would have the chance to speak with him. Suddenly, the man dismisses the girl so he can talk to Blade. Outside, she is full of envy, while inside the room, he tells the boy that he wants him to regain his hero powers. Blade just wants to be a regular person, but the man says that this school has excellent students who can help him recover. It turns out they are trying to create great heroes like Blade in this school, but the boy says he doesn't need to because the Demon King is already gone. However, the man reveals that he heard that the 2 of them ended up exchanging blows that annihilated each other's power, but he still believes that the powers of the great hero will revive. Meanwhile, outside, the students are training, and when Ernest notices Blade arriving, she tells him he shouldn't be there because it's the advanced class. But the boy explains that he took the test for the lower classes, but they sent him here. The redhead imagines that he bribed someone or entered through the back door. She's suspicious. She also comments that this academy doesn't accept careless people like him, but Blade says he has genuine feelings and really wants to make 100 friends in this place. Suddenly, Blade introduces himself to everyone he sees, and the phrase, "I am Blade," is what he says the most in this episode. When Ernest gets his attention, he puts his hand on her head and says he's listening, but this makes her turn as red as a tomato, and she instinctively tries to hit him with her sword, but Blade dodges the attack with a jump, and we see that the attack was strong enough to damage a part of the wall in the distance. Suddenly, a more reserved girl with blue hair warns that the instructor is calling. Blade introduces himself as usual, but the girl remains silent. Ernest tries to encourage the girl to respond, but she talks to Blade, introducing herself as Sophie. The redhead then calls the instructor and says she wants to test the new student's power. This wasn't in the lesson plan, but the girl is so intimidating when she tries to intimidate that the man allows it. Blade has a sword in hand, facing an armor that he recognizes as magical metal. The redhead says that all advanced students can at least cut the object, and if he can't, it will be proven that he entered through the back door, and he will have to leave. She also extols the advanced class, saying it's in a different league, so Blade tries to prepare an attack strong enough to match the class. A bright aura appears around the boy, and the students recognize this power by the name Dragon of Destruction. The boy performs an attack called Dragon Eater that pulverizes the armor, and the impact wave is so strong that it damages the Empress's clothes and throws her far away. Not only that, but the front wall has a huge hole and the sword shatters. Ernest is in mess after the impact and asks who Blade really is, but the boy tries to say he's just a regular person. Trust him. During the break, the redhead is eating alone when Blade shows up to sit with her. He tries to invite the group of his first friends, but no one accepts to sit with them. The Empress says that this table is exclusive to her. Blade asks if she's being bullied, but the girl explains that everyone is afraid of her. When he tastes the lunch, the boy is amazed by the flavor despite it being normal food. At this moment, the girl takes back what she said about him entering through the back door, but the boy doesn't even remember that. Ernest is annoyed by the boy's lack of concern, but he thanks her for helping him make friends. The girl doesn't understand at first, so he explains that they are friends now and are even having lunch together. Again, she turns as red as a tomato, but says that it shouldn't be a problem to be his friend. Even the other students are impressed by this reaction from the Empress. The next day, she is fierce in the training battles. When facing a guy with a magical spear, she easily counters an attack, sending the guy flying. Suddenly, the redhead appears in front of him with a scary face and almost hits him with the sword, stopping just in time. The next opponent is Sophie, who fights only with bracelets. This fight is more evenly matched than the previous one, with both managing to attack and defend alternately. However, after a fire attack by Ernest, Sophie surrenders. Next is Blade, but before they fight, he questions why she's behaving this way. Suddenly, the girl sees something strange, drops her sword, and falls unconscious, but Blade approaches in time to catch her. In the infirmary, the doctor says there's nothing to be done. Blade wants them to help her as they helped him, but the woman says she can heal all sorts of illnesses or injuries, but magic and curses are not her area, meaning the redhead is cursed. After she wakes up, Blade tells her what happened, but when he says it was difficult to carry her, the girl gets angry because it sounds like he's talking about her weight. The doctor tells the girl to rest a little longer, but she says she's already better and confronts the woman who doesn't want to let her leave. Only when Blade asks, explaining that the girl is better, he'll keep an eye on her, does the woman give in. In the corridor, the Empress strides ahead, saying she can walk on her own. Blade says she can count on him because they're friends, but Ernest only tells him not to tell anyone what he heard in the infirmary. At night, in a high-tech training room, the boy finds himself facing all the training robots destroyed. Apparently, he went all out. When he enters a more restricted room, Blade goes to a computer and looks up information about the Academy, where he finds information about Ernest's sword. It's a demon sword called Asmodeus. The last training robot suddenly appears, but the boy defeats it easily. With this information, Blade goes to the Empress and invites her to talk, revealing that he knows the secret of her sword. By the school wall, he explains that the blade has a life of its own and gives the user great power, but Ernest is not yet the sword's true owner. The redhead begins to tell that when she was 6 years old, she touched the cursed sword of the Flaming family without knowing it. The swords will try to take over her body and flowed through the girl in search of blood and carnage. Since then, she's been trying to contain these impulses, and whenever she lets her guard down, she can hear Asmodeus' voice begging to let him cut and burn. Blade recognizes that the demon hasn't taken control yet. There's a way for the girl to establish herself as the sword's bearer, but she's afraid to try and fail, releasing a demon into the world. Blade says that everything will be fine because if something happens, he'll deal with it. As they look at the destroyed wall, Ernest recognizes that the boy is truly capable. Therefore, she decides to try to take control of the sword. The girl invokes the power of the demon and challenges him. A giant tower of flames appears around the girl, who receives a mental image of the demon Asmodeus in a giant and chained form. He says he is the flame, the power, and the violence, but the girl is not afraid to face him. Meanwhile, in the physical world, the fire turns into a female spirit with a thirst for destruction. But when it advances towards Blade, he defeats the creature with just one punch. Ernest, on the other hand, summons a golden sword to face the demon. Asmodeus concentrates his ki and releases a Kamehameha towards the girl, but the power of the sword clashes with it, while outside the tower of fire becomes even larger, throwing the girl out unconscious. Blade catches her before she hits the ground. Afterward, the redhead appears at school greeting the other students, and now she sports a different hairstyle with an ornament in her hair. Everyone is impressed by the Empress, who always had a dominant appearance and is now more smiling and even a little cute. During training, Blade helps some of his colleagues in a simulated fight, or rather in an attempt at a fight, as he's so agile that none of them can land a hit on him. Ernest, upon witnessing this scene, reprimands Blade, telling him to at least draw his sword and not disrespect his opponents by looking away during the fight. It's only at this moment that he realizes there's something different about the redhead. She becomes a bit embarrassed but waits for him to mention what he noticed, while the blonde with the magic spear named Leonard also nudges him to speak up. Both Ernest and Leonard wait for Blade to say something, but he says he doesn't know, disappointing them both. The blonde remarks that he should notice when a lady changes her hairstyle. Taking advantage of the moment, the redhead instructs Blade to help a girl named Sophie with her situation. It turns out this girl has some social issues. She usually keeps to herself and obeys any orders given to her. Ernest explains that he's never seen Sophie take any action on her own, but she greeted Blade the other day, which was a real surprise. Blade approaches the girl and introduces himself, but Sophie says she already knows who he is. He explains that Ernest asked him to observe her training, so Sophie asks if it was an order. Blade tries to clarify that it was just a request, but that he's really there to try to help. Regarding the training, the girl says she can only use her fists because that's all she's been taught, so Blade decides to teach her other forms of combat. Once again, Sophie asks if it's an order, but he says he just wants to try to help because they're friends, but he doesn't want to force her to do anything. Even though it's not an order, Sophie doesn't mind and agrees to try, but that's when the instructor announces that practical training is over. Blade complains because he had just started, but Ernest says it's because he was procrastinating. Later, the two of them begin training, and we see that Sophie can barely make a dent in the magical armor with the sword. Blade starts explaining how to focus the combat spirit in the sword. He says that since she has no problem channeling this spirit into her fists, she should think of the sword as an extension of her own body. He demonstrates by enveloping the blade with a golden aura and smoothly slicing through the armor as if it were butter. Apparently, Sophie understands, and after some time, she manages to channel it and destroys several armors with this new technique. Blade acknowledges that she learns quickly and thinks it's enough for her to handle the sword in this way for now. As the training ends, Sophie asks if she's better than Ernest now. The guy admits that it won't be easy to reach her level. Out of nowhere, Sophie demonstrates after tossing the sword back to Blade. She easily takes him down and immobilizes him with this precise technique, showing that she's much more efficient without the sword. The guy confirms that she's more efficient and complains that he can't move. Sophie says that wouldn't be a good position if the opponent could move freely. Before parting ways, Sophie says she'll want him to teach her more things the next day. In the morning, the director talks to Blade and asks how school life is going. Blade says he's made some friends, and the director is relieved, saying it must be really hard to make friends when you've been a hero since the age of 3. Blade gets a little annoyed by the way the director says this, but the man genuinely thinks it's good news. He asks who Blade's friend is, and the guy says there are more than one, with the most recent being Sophie. The director reveals that he already knew Blade would be interested in her and talks about how strong she is. He says that Sophie is still incomplete because she doesn't surpass Blade yet. When Blade asks what he's talking about, the director explains that he thought Blade befriended Sophie because he knew the secret about the artificial hero project. However, Blade genuinely doesn't know what he's talking about. The director then explains that Sophie's real name is Sophitia Femto. The word femto means 12, meaning the Sophie Blade knows is the 12th clone of the original human named Sophitia. Being an experiment, she was treated as an object for a long time. Horrified by this information, Blade questions the director's actions, but the man explains that he had no involvement in it, and that he has already put an end to that organization. He continues to tell Blade that when he told Sophie she was free, she kept asking if it was an order, and she continues to do so even now. Suddenly, Blade rushes out of the director's office and in the school corridor. He thinks about how she was deprived of a normal life just because they wanted to create a great hero. Feeling guilty because if he didn't exist, none of this would have happened, Blade decides to help Sophie regain a normal life. The problem is, Blade also doesn't know what normal is. So he goes to the infirmary to ask what it means to be normal and what kids his age do. The doctor thinks he's interested in certain things and offers to teach him everything he needs to know about youth. Fortunately, Blade doesn't understand her innuendo and just wants to find out what youth is. He asks Leonard about the meaning of youth, and Leonard talks about love. Then he asks some girls about love and what people do when they love. One of them gets embarrassed and says that people do things like going out together. Blade understands that she's talking about dates and rushes off to ask Ernest about it. She also gets completely embarrassed, but Blade pleads for an explanation. The redhead says that couples spend time together talking and walking around, but since she misunderstood Blade's intentions, she tries to explain that they haven't reached that level yet, but Blade wasn't even listening and rushes off again. On the following day, Blade organizes a date with Sophie, and it's so meticulously planned that practically every minute of the date is scheduled. Blade reads the list of things they have to do while Ernest and other girls follow them to eavesdrop. The problem with the planning is that they are already a bit behind schedule, so Sophie suggests they start right away. The redhead feels jealous when she sees the two of them walking arm in arm. One of the new friends tells her it's normal. When the supposed couple arrives at a game arcade, they decide to try out the punching machine, while Ernest and the others know this could cause some trouble. Unfortunately, it's too late, and the two youngsters end up breaking the machine as if it were nothing. The girls then apologize to the shop owner while the couple leaves. The redhead says they can put it on the Rosewood Academy's tab. Afterward, the pair goes to another place to share a drink with double straws. Since they managed to keep up with the schedule, there's still 1 minute left to finish their drinks. However, when Sophie mentions that she's thirsty, Blade says it's okay. The problem is the difficulty they have drinking the liquid, so Sophie suggests he move a bit closer. But when their faces touch, Blade is startled and ends up falling. He doesn't quite understand what's happening, but his heart is racing. Nevertheless, Blade returns to drink with Sophie, trying to control his heart. Meanwhile, Ernest finds it very inappropriate for the two of them to have their cheeks touching. Checking the next step of the date, Blade realizes they're running behind again, but Sophie suggests they take a shortcut. So the two of them run quickly and climb a building's wall in perfect sync. From the air, they adjust their direction and leap between the city's buildings, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. At night, they sit near a legendary fountain. Sophie says she had fun and asks why he's doing all this for her. Blade replies that it's because they're friends. This prompts the girl to remember that someone once told her that friends don't keep secrets from each other, and there's something she hasn't told Blade. Since they're friends, Sophie has something to tell him. Unaware that Blade already knows everything, she reveals that she's not a regular human, but an incomplete guinea pig created to be an artificial hero. They gave her something called artificial great hero powers. She demonstrates by first showing her aura and then distorting a metal railing. She explains that the great hero powers can alter the laws of physics, but while using the metal to lift herself into the air, Sophie reveals that she doesn't have full control. Using gravity manipulation, she lands on the ground, creating a small crater. She explains that she tried to increase her body's weight by 1,000 times, but instead increased by 10,000 times. When Blade gets up, she shows an even more impressive ability. She simply stops time. Then Sophie explains that she can only manifest the artificial great hero powers for a mere 10 seconds. Sheikah knows her real name is Sophitia Femto, the 12th clone of the original Sophitia. Essentially, she's the last model of the artificial great hero project, the only successful outcome of the project, but with some reservations. With this revelation, Blade decides he won't keep secrets either and tells her that he's what they call the great hero. In fact, he used to be called that in the past, but he can't use those powers anymore. Upon hearing this, Sophie says that something about him seemed familiar. Blade apologizes and says she can hate him if she wants. She asks why, and he explains that he's the reason she has these cursed powers. Sophie questions why they're cursed, so Blade says this power is a curse since he never asked to be the great hero, but they told him he could save everyone, so he had no choice. His powers manifested when he was 3 years old, and ever since then, all he did was fight, often coming close to death. He grew stronger, but he still couldn't save everyone all the time. When he couldn't save someone, others would get angry because the hero was supposed to save everyone. He concludes the story by asking what it means to be a hero. Sophie then approaches Blade again and tells him that even though he didn't choose it, he was the great hero. She explains that after being rescued by the king, she embarked on a journey of self-discovery. That's when she encountered people who had been saved by the great hero. She visited many cities that had been saved. Finally, Sophie says that Blade should be proud. If he can't, that's okay. But she herself is proud to have been created to be an artificial great hero and still wants to be like Blade. After hearing this, Blade recalls everything he's been through so far and decides not to let his past as the great hero bother him anymore. The girl approves of his decision, and it becomes a promise between these two young individuals. One day in the cafeteria, Blade eats quickly and Ernest notices that there is food around his mouth. Sophie doesn't waste time and uses a tissue to clean it up. This leaves Ernest embarrassed and jealous, but Blade says that she was the one who pointed it out. Suddenly, the Empress's friends and 2 other students join them at the table. One of the girls asks Blade what he thinks of their outfits, and Ernest explains that these 4 students have moved up to the advanced class and can dress however they want without wearing the school uniform. The girl repeats her question, and Blade remarks that she must be cold wearing a summer outfit. At that moment, Leonard appears to introduce himself to the girls, showing how impressed he is by their beauty. One of the girls even becomes interested because she finds him quite handsome, but the blonde-haired student explains that he loves all women equally and can't be tied down to just one. Ernest interrupts the womanizer's speech and mentions that she heard the director is going to bring a magical beast to the school. The newcomers from the advanced class become concerned, thinking they'll have to face the beast as part of their training, which could be very challenging. However, Blade doesn't think it's the old man's idea. The redhead scolds him for calling the king an old man and being so disrespectful. Suddenly, an earthquake begins and all the students become alert. Nobody knows what's happening yet, so the group decides to take action. The guards are trying to defend the school against a giant dragon but aren't making much progress. When the students arrive at the scene, Blade quickly approaches the creature with a plate of food in hand. The dragon begins to roar and Ernest prepares to act, but Sophie stops her. What Blade does is jump and lightly strike the creature's head, knocking it down instantly. Everyone is impressed, but Blade explains that this is just a dragon hatchling. Thinking the creature is hungry, he tosses the entire plate for the dragon to eat, but the creature breathes fire because the food is spicy. The other students are still amazed that he defeated the monster without even needing a weapon. Blade tries to convince everyone that it's normal, but no one buys it. He even explains that this isn't even a great dragon or ancient dragon, so it's not that difficult to defeat with one blow. Everyone backs away as the dragon looks up. The creature starts to glow and transforms into a blonde girl who grabs Blade and calls him Dad. At first, he doesn't know what's happening but promises to look for her parents later. At the moment, he wants to find the dragon that was just there. Ernest informs him that the dragon shrank and turned into this girl, but Blade says that's impossible. He tries to get the girl to be quiet, and she boasts about being silent for a whole 10 seconds just because he asked. Blade starts to believe the story only when Sophie confirms that she also saw the transformation. Obviously, the jealous redhead questions why he only believed it when Sophie said it, but the dragon girl begins to speak again, bragging about staying quiet for a full 10 seconds just because he asked. Blade doesn't know why she's calling him Dad, and she explains that his punch was amazing, and she expected nothing less from her own father. She then starts insistently asking to play with him. Later, during bath time, Blade helps clean the little creature and gives her the name Cuchulainn in honor of a dedicated knight who was very strong and always kept his promises. The dragon girl confirms that she will always keep her word because dragons always keep their oaths. At this moment, Ernest knocks on the door and enters without waiting for an answer but gets embarrassed because she didn't know he was taking a bath. She tells him what she found out. When dragons and other magical creatures are defeated, they still retain a fragment of their soul as a cluster of knowledge. When this soul reincarnates, it can imitate the form of the strongest being that defeated it. This means that in this case, a human must have been able to defeat the dragon, but Ernest says that few humans could do something like that. When Ernest realizes that Cuchulainn was also in the room, she scolds Blade strongly, calling him indecent. The next day, Blade is the one feeding her, as if she were really his daughter. Another girl, named Claire, tries to feed her, but Cuchulainn gets angry and says she won't be friends with weak humans. She also begins to talk about Blade's duties as a father and says it's not good for him to be staring at the bodies of adult women. After hearing this conversation, the girls at the table judge Blade as despicable. During training time, his punishment is that he can't join the advanced class veterans, but when the dragon girl appears, he calls her to train with him. Cuchulainn says she doesn't need training but can do it since he insists. At that moment, the newcomers from the advanced class show up, saying they were instructed to seek his help. One of the girls says she was thinking of specializing as a spy, so Blade directs her to train with Sophie. Before starting training with the remaining three, Blade talks to the dragon girl again, but she disappears. Later, Cuchulainn is wandering around when she encounters other students training. They invite her to join them, but she doesn't think anyone is a match for her, so she runs until she bumps into Blade. Cuchulainn says she's hungry, so he invites her to eat some curry. At night, while the dragon girl is sleeping, Ernest knocks on Blade's door and they stop to talk. She explains that dragons are tormented by their parents as soon as they are born, so the hatchling already discovers that something stronger than itself exists and starts treating it as a parent. That's why Cuchulainn, who has lived alone since birth, started to think that Blade was her father after that punch he delivered. Ernest tells him he can't pretend forever, but Blade thinks that if he doesn't act as her father, the dragon girl will really be alone, and the redhead knows how much loneliness hurts. At this moment, it's revealed that Sophie was also there but hidden. Both girls were worried about Blade, but he is sure that everything will work out with Cuchulainn. Sophie then leaves, and the redhead decides to leave as well to avoid raising any malicious rumors. When Blade returns to his room, the dragon girl is no longer there, but the window is open, and he follows the trail to the roof, where he finds Cuchulainn sitting and looking at the two moons. The girl says it calms her. She compares the larger moon to a father and the smaller moon to a child, and that's why they are always together. Cuchulainn also explains that she always looked at them when she was alone. Blade knows deep down that she wants to make friends, but the dragon girl says that dragons are much stronger than humans, both physically and mentally, so they don't form groups and end up living and dying alone. In other words, she doesn't think she needs friends, she just needs her father. After this conversation, they watch the moons together. The next day, Blade talks to the king about Cuchulainn, who should have been in the director's office, but when the king was treating her like a child, the girl got angry and left. Blade calls the king useless for not even being able to be a babysitter, but the king doesn't mind being reprimanded since it never happens to him due to his status as a monarch. Blade returns to the dormitory without having found the dragon girl yet, but he hears her voice as he approaches the room. Cuchulainn is playing with some little figurines, pretending that one is Blade and the other is Ernest. The game simulates a situation where Blade would be reprimanding the Empress for hurting her little friends. Blade realizes that Cuchulainn imitates the personalities of those she knows very poorly. However, he can identify some of the characters in the play, especially Leonard, whom the girl imitates by saying she loves all women equally. Blade concludes that Cuchulainn is very good at observing others. There are many more toys scattered around, and she begins to interact between several of them, naming almost all the students in the school and concluding a scene where Blade would say that his daughter has 108 friends. Observing this moment of loneliness for the dragon girl, Blade walks away and passes by Ernest without even speaking to her. Suddenly, the redhead hears a noise of pounding and goes to see what is happening when she finds Blade banging his head against the wall. The other students in the dormitory also appear at that moment to see what is happening. In a more isolated place, Blade explains that Cuchulainn needs friends, but it's impossible due to her instincts. Dragons do not recognize anyone weaker than themselves as equals, so for Cuchulainn to recognize any of them as friends, they need to defeat her. It won't work if only Blade can match her. Others must participate as well. Ernest concludes that there is really nothing Blade can do by himself, so he should trust other people because he can't solve everything alone. The girl reminds him that she asked for his help when she needed it not too long ago, so it's unfair for her to have depended on him, and now he won't do the same. Ernest also says that his attitude is too arrogant and advises him to ask for help from her and from everyone else as well. The next day, both of them go to the class of lower-ranked students, surprising everyone by their presence. Blade then starts speaking, asking for a favor from all of them. He wants the students to unite to defeat the dragon, but the students know that talk is cheap. However, Blade bows and begs, and Ernest does the same, surprising everyone. Then the rest of the advanced class students appear to ask for their help as well. Everyone is concerned about Cuchulainn, so with so many students from the advanced class imploring them, the lower-ranked students agree to try to help. As a result, all the students gather and Cuchulainn arrives in the arena in her dragon form. The king is in the stands ready to watch, and he sees this situation as a kind of practical training for the students. The assistant asks if the dragon will really recognize defeat against such a large group, and the director replies that yes, because from a dragon's perspective, humans are living beings who work collectively, just as humans don't consider bees as cowards for fighting together in a swarm. To a dragon, this also applies to humans. The only problem for the king is that Blade won't be participating because he wanted to see the boy fight. Meanwhile, Blade talks to the dragon. He learned that when humans captured her, she was placed in a trap so she couldn't use her own strength. But this time it's going to be a fair fight in which humans will show how strong they can be, and Cuchulainn can also demonstrate her strength to everyone. She lifts her head and breathes out a little fire, while Ernest draws her sword and takes command of the other students, motivating everyone to start the battle. In this battle against Kimberly's students, the dragon starts with an advantage, sending most of the students running while knocking down some with tail strikes. As it begins to breathe fire, Ernest lands a blazing sword strike, reinvigorating her classmates, reminding them of their training strategies. Now, everyone resumes their combat positions, forming some shield walls, but it's not enough to withstand Cuchulainn's attacks. When the students start shooting arrows, Blade gets excited, but the king seems to have noticed something. Ernest continues to command the attacks and strategies. When the students begin to target the creature's blind spots, the director comments that it's a good strategy, but has a problem. These common attacks don't cause any damage to a dragon protected by scales. This twist keeps Blade even more attentive. Many students are already injured, so Claire starts treating her classmates with healing magic. Meanwhile, the dragon continues to attack fiercely. At one point, Blade realizes that it's the students' chance to counterattack. Suffy leaps and delivers a powerful punch to Cuchulainn's face, while Ernest uses Asmodeus' power for another fiery attack. The king notes that the students have caused some damage but thinks their plan has failed, yet Blade has seen that everything is going according to plan. With all the dust kicked up, the creature can't see anything anymore and ends up stepping on weak spots in the ground, causing it to fall into a giant pit. The director thinks this was unfair, but Blade explains that it would have been an unfair trap if it had been prepared beforehand, but that's not the case since Leonard started digging when the battle had already begun and everything so far was just to buy time. Nevertheless, this isn't enough to defeat this dragon. The students haven't lost focus. Even fallen, Cuchulainn continues to attack with fire. When Ernest prepares the next attack, the Asmodeus sword starts to falter due to overuse, but she tells the demon to stop being weak. She also instructs Leonard to attack, and he uses the spear's spinning function, but it's not enough to damage the dragon, and he's thrown away. Fortunately, he's still in good shape. Coachellane starts flying upward, so Ernest leaps for another fire attack with Asmodeus, which is still struggling with the attacks. Next is Sophie, descending from above to deliver another incredibly potent blow, knocking Coachellane to the ground with great force. Ernest then raises the sword and begins to demand even more power. Asmodeus continues to weaken, but she doesn't stop showing who's in control of the sword now. Even the king is impressed by all this power. And it's not just her powers. The other students start channeling their own magical powers through their hands. Even the lower class students are all united in this magical chain. With all the support, Ernest starts preparing a kind of fiery Genki-dama with the power borrowed from her classmates. She gets ready to use the giant fireball, while Blade hopes that Coachellane understands this as the power of humans. Ernest's super attack hits the creature hard, which soon returns to its human form, now exhausted after the intense battle. The problem now is that the dragon girl thinks she's a disappointment to Blade and that weak children are abandoned. However, the hero says he would never do that and explains that she's mistaken because it's not her who's weak, but the humans who were stronger. He then asks if she can be friends with them now. With that, the girl starts saying that she doesn't mind being friends with these humans, but Blade corrects her by saying it's not like that. Finally, Coachellane asks them to be her friends, and of course, everyone accepts. Sometime later, a new piece of equipment arrives in the training arena. The king comments that he likes to see the students' growth and has prepared an even more practical training. The device that's arriving is virtual reality technology. The director also mentions that this was done using an area of magic that has been lost for a long time called science, and he can't wait for it to be ready. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, the students are much closer to Coachellane, with Claire trying to feed the girl while another student named Yennefer holds her in her lap. At first, Coachellane tries to act grown-up, but she eventually gives in to Claire's care and everyone finds her adorable in this situation. At this moment, Blade notices something different about Ernest, and it turns out she's a bit rounder, so to speak. Everyone becomes apprehensive about what he might say next and urges him to stop. The girls say she hasn't changed at all, but the hero continues to insist that she has changed completely. The situation starts to get tense, and Leonard tries to say that the Empress is wonderful, whether she's thin or fat. This, of course, makes the girl freak out. And what's worse is that Blade realizes that this is indeed what changed and comments that she's gotten fat. This upsets the girl a lot, and she runs away. Everyone agrees that Blade was the main culprit, and Yennefer says he was perfect without explaining what she means. 3 days later, the group goes to the dormitory, all worried because Ernest has locked herself in her room for 3 days. Blade is still confused about what being perfect has to do with this, but Yennefer finally explains that she meant he was a perfect idiot. This leaves Blade in shock because he doesn't want to stop being friends with the Empress. He decides to apologize to see if the girl forgives him. But the other girls know it won't do any good if he doesn't know exactly what's upsetting the redhead, and it will likely only make the situation worse. So they all decide to go together since they're all concerned about her. After knocking on the door and getting no response, Yennefer decides to use a tool to open the lock. When they enter the room, they see Ernest in a corner, seemingly crying in a strange way, but only Coachellane realizes what's happening and jumps over to the girl. When they turn on the light, everyone finally sees that the redhead was stuffing herself with sweets. She says that everything is very delicious and explains that ever since the fight against the dragon girl, she's been feeling hungry all the time. I guess it's a worm problem. Who knows? She says she didn't know there was so much delicious food. When Blade asks if they're not friends anymore, Ernest explains that she just didn't want him to see her this way. With this answer, the boy becomes very happy and relieved that they're still friends. Thinking that everything is resolved, he prepares to leave, but the girls hold him back because he still hasn't understood that the Empress needs help. They tell him he should say something kind. The guy comments on how nice it is to enjoy sweets, but of course that statement doesn't help. So they summon Leonard from somewhere to show him how it's done. The blonde starts well, saying that he's still tirelessly devoted to her, but he ends up saying that it doesn't matter how fat she is. This makes him receive such a strong attack that he goes flying. Without wasting time, Blade makes his attempt, saying that this isn't something she can handle alone, so she should trust the friends who can help her. This leaves the girl emotional, and the others see that he finally got something right. Now, Ernest is determined to solve this problem. It all begins with a heavy workout, starting with a run to burn calories. Blade and Coachellane act as trainers to help the chubby girl. After the run, there are squats, and the dragon girl now acts as a cheerleader to support the redhead. Next are sit-ups, and both Ernest and Coachellane do the exercise, but it's very difficult for the Empress. The next exercises are push-ups, but these are also quite challenging. To assist with the diet, Claire prepares a lunch with very few calories for her, so the poor girl knows she'll be hungry, but what can she do? Later, the girl spends some time in the sauna, trying to relax, but the place is too hot. When she comes out, she finds the other girls waiting with a scale to measure her weight. The redhead steps on the device, but she's so heavy that she breaks the base. The girls comment that instead of losing weight, she seems to have gained more. Concerned, Blade appears over the wall to ask how they're doing, but since this is the women's locker room, they hit him with a bowl. Lying on the ground, he has a breakdown about being a hero or just an ordinary person. Meanwhile, the poor Empress is sad, but the other girls theorize that she must have gained some muscles with the training, so her weight hasn't decreased yet. Claire thinks it would be good to find a way to boost her metabolism. The next day, Ernest decides to try something more drastic. She only relies on Blade's help and goes with him to test site number 2, which is protected by a powerful magical barrier, so if they fail in what she's trying to do, there won't be any risks. The girl draws her sword and asks the guy to praise her if she manages to lose weight, so Blade agrees. She tells him to rely on her if something happens and begins a magical incantation to conjure the power of the sword in a way that her body is used as an energy source. Flames surround the girl for a while until they form a gigantic tower of fire. The other girls arrive at the scene worried, but Blade tells them to trust the Empress. Suddenly, the redhead undergoes a transformation and takes on a demon-like form. She says it's very hot, but it seems to have worked, and indeed, in this form, she appears slimmer. The demon Asmodeus starts speaking as well, saying that none of her ancestors managed to achieve this form. When Cuchulainn asks what happened to the girl's body, the demon's voice explains that the flesh that succumbed was transformed into flames by his hands. This form is an immortal body immune to physical attacks. Now, Asmodeus wants an enemy worthy of facing this power, an enemy he can burn, but Ernest says all she wants to burn is fat. The demon is confused, but the girl explains that she did all of this because of her diet since she knows she's burning a lot of energy. Asmodeus confirms that indeed the downside of this demonic form is the large amount of energy consumed. To maintain the transformation, it needs 1 million calories per hour. This information makes the girl very happy because she can burn all the fat at once. The problem is that now she reaches her limit and gets hungry. But in this form, she enters a beast mode, wanting to eat her companions in the gastronomic sense. She advances towards Claire, so Blade prepares the demon banishment attack, but the version that only uses air displacement. Just that is enough to save the girl's life. She wakes up in the hero's arms, who praises the excellent job she did. The problem is that after that, Ernest and Cuchulainn are caught secretly eating all the sweets, and the redhead has gained weight again. She says she'll lose it soon if she turns into the flame demon, but the others agree that it's just an excuse for the weak. Meanwhile, Cuchulainn thoroughly enjoys this new diet. One day, we see Blade in the doctor's office, where the doctor says he's making progress and has reached 30%, but this means that if he reaches using 30% of the power, he will end up going berserk. After that, Blade meets Claire in the school hallway. She introduces him to a very shy girl named Maria. Blade remembers that she was in the magic squad during the battle against Cuchulainn and mentions that the girl stumbled several times and even shot a fireball in the wrong direction. Searching for a word for this, the boy ends up calling her clumsy. Despite essentially being insulted, the girl even agrees that she's quite clumsy. However, Maria wanted to make a request to Blade. She wants him to eliminate her. But it's not as crazy as it sounds. With everyone gathered in the cafeteria, she explains that she wants Blade to eliminate her if she loses control. The truth is, Maria isn't human. At this moment, Blade recognizes that she is a night demon. The girl explains that there is a magical beast with terrifying powers inside her, and as she tries to explain, she accidentally breaks a cup and evaporates all the liquid. But this serves as an example to explain that this kind of thing happens when she can't control her own strength. Up until now, she's kept it under control, but since the battle against the dragon, the girl can't control it completely anymore. Claire then reveals that they both studied at the same school before coming to this academy. After that, Maria explains that she lost her parents a while ago and has nowhere to go if she leaves the academy. With the girl in tears, Blade also mentions that he doesn't have parents. Sophie and Yennefer also share this absence, and soon all the students at the table offer to help the girl. They go to the training arena with a magical protection barrier at maximum level. Blade's idea is for Maria to stop holding back her powers and release them all at once, similar to what he did to help Ernest. Maria is unsure about doing this, but Claire manages to calm her down even though she comments that Blade's method is kind of stupid, sparking a small argument. In the end, the girl decides to put her faith in her friends. She then removes the bracelets and leg guards, saying that each of these items limits her power by half. Since there are 4 seals, this already reduces her power by 16 times. However, there's still a pendant that is the most powerful seal, limiting her power to 1/10, meaning that with everything combined, her power was reduced by 160 times. Concerned, Ernest approaches, but when the last seal is broken, the girl's power generates a very strong wind. Blade tells her to believe in her friends, so she finally releases her full power, transforming into a woman with a demonic appearance, and the boy calls her the Demon King. The woman laughs like a villain and delivers a speech, saying that the Demon King has been reborn. Soon after, Ernest summons the power of Asmodeus to transform and attack the demon woman, but she is defeated in the first attack. Leonard is also easily defeated, so Sophie and Cuchulainn take action. Sophie grabs the opponent and uses the power of supreme gravity to pin her to the ground, while Cuchulainn prepares a powerful fire blast. However, the demon woman completely absorbs the attack, condensing it into a small sphere that she throws back, thus defeating the dragon. With only Blade left, he launches the first attack but causes no damage. The villain realizes that he's trying to capture the Demon King alive and urges him to face her seriously to avoid being taken down. With a gust of wind, the boy is thrown against the magical barrier, but he quickly returns to the ground and tries various attacks with the sword, but none of them are effective. Now it's the demon woman's turn to attack. She unleashes a red energy blast that Blade defends with the sword, but it shatters the blade. Ernest then hands the Asmodeus sword to him. The sword demon doesn't like it, but since it's the will of his master, he considers it a limited contract. Intent on ending this fight with just one more strike, Blade concentrates his own energy, generating an aura around his body and the sword. Asmodeus becomes a little afraid, but Blade won't stop now. He invokes the power of Asmodeus and delivers a powerful attack. The villain defends with a magical barrier and even compliments the boy's power, but she seems confident in her own power. However, the barrier starts to crack, so she asks who this guy is. Blade replies that for now, he's just a normal person and finishes the attack, which is so powerful that it even shatters the arena's barrier completely. After that, the boy falls unconscious. He wakes up in the infirmary and the doctor is very relieved that he woke up, showing that she was very concerned about him. She explains that if she hadn't arrived in time, he would have been a goner. With the woman crying, Blade apologizes and asks about the other students. The doctor says they are all okay. Then we see Maria walking around the school being greeted by various people. She seems more confident and still has some demonic traits. Blade talks to her, and the girl almost reveals that he is the great hero, which is his weakness. When Blade calls her Maria, the girl says that Maria is a different personality. For now, this demonic personality doesn't have a name, but the others keep calling her Mao. In the principal's office, the king confirms that he was the one who accepted Maria into the school, already aware of her identity. Maria's mother was human, but her father was the Demon King. Outside, the group talks about the two different personalities and discusses the fact that Maria hasn't returned yet, fearing that this personality will be lost forever. At night, Mao goes to Blade's room with the intention of taking him out for a talk. Someone told her that it would be a date, and despite Blade having some rules about date times, the girl grabs him and they fly off. During his aerial stroll, Blade notices that she doesn't seem to know much and asks what the age of this personality would be. Mao replies that she began to gain consciousness about 5 years ago, but she quickly mentions that age doesn't matter for magical beasts. She takes him to a rooftop while saying that, as a maiden, she doesn't like to be treated like a child. Mao also mentions that the reason for continuing at the school even after being freed is Blade himself, who is the great hero. The thing is, a magical beast tends to seek strength, but the girl doesn't yet know what's keeping her attached to Blade, especially since he's weaker since the battle against the Demon King. At the moment, it wouldn't even be worth defeating the great hero due to his lack of power, but the girl is determined to leave this place only after eliminating him. In a way, the demon girl imagines that she feels some kind of attraction to him. It's just a hypothesis, but she would like to test it, so she asks if he doesn't want to be her partner. The problem is that neither of them knows exactly what that means. For Blade, the easiest thing would be for them to go to the training arena and fight until they're satisfied, but Mao reminds him that he's not in a condition to fight. Furthermore, she can't remove the pendant of her own volition because Maria's consciousness inside her would resist. Blade then asks what happened to Maria, and Mao replies that she's hiding deep in her heart. Despite appearances, there are some shadows in the girl's heart. She was despised and feared by humans, and it was tough for Maria to be forced to live in hiding with her mother. The woman believed that her father would return, but the girl couldn't believe that. Everything got worse when her mother left. With a heart full of doubts, Maria wondered if her father really loved her mother and what the reason was for him abandoning the human world. She also questioned whether he was the cause of all her mother's suffering. And that's how Mao was born, to escape this unbearable pain in the girl's heart. And that's why Maria might never come back. Mao says she told all this because Blade is closer to them than to humans. A few days later, a blonde girl who was Maria's friend named Eliza tells the group of students that she did some research and found out that the pendant being a sealing object doesn't make sense. However, Mao knows that she was restricted by this object, but the blonde believes it's a recording device, something that holds some message. Eliza says that this recording might bring Maria back, but it could also make Mao disappear. Either way, Mao is willing to discover what the recording is. When the process begins, Clara says she would like to be friends with Mao if it doesn't mean having to abandon Maria. However, the demon girl is fine with it, and she already imagined that one of them would have to disappear. Eliza finishes the conjuration and tells Mao to open the pendant. When the girl does that, an image of the demon king appears in front of them. The message was directed to Amelia, Maria's mother. He asks for forgiveness for leaving her behind because he had an enemy to face and didn't want her to follow that bloody path. The guy also informs about the woman's pregnancy, which she hadn't realized at the time. He reveals the names he had chosen: Ortis if it were a boy and Maria if it were a girl. He also says that when the child can understand this language, the woman should tell them that their father was no longer alive. Meanwhile, Maria and Mao's consciousness is me, and Mao is willing to revive her counterpart so they can fight for control of the body. The message continues with the Demon King swearing his love for the family. When the message ends, Mao explains that she and Maria are fighting internally to see who will survive, and it seems that Mao is losing the battle. To help her, she asks her friends to call Maria's name and says she doesn't mind. When the group calls for their friend, the girl awakens and falls to the ground. She starts crying but is comforted by her friends. Nevertheless, after that, Blade prepares for a battle against Maria, who strangely manages to switch consciousness with Mao voluntarily, even after what happened. The girl is confident that this time she will defeat Blade, but he is not going to go easy on her. The fight begins while the girls comment that Mao didn't disappear during the process of Maria's recovery, which means that the girl wishes to coexist with her counterpart. This was the future she desired. Meanwhile, Blade has the upper hand in the duel, but it seems more like a game than a battle. A few days after Maria's situation, we find Blade complaining that he can't eat anymore after trying a pudding the size of a bucket. Unlike him, Cuchulainn was very happy after the meal. He walks carrying the dragon girl along with Sophie and Ernest until they reach a passage where a cart seems to be blocking the way. In an attempt to help, the redhead suggests taking another street to continue ahead, but it's at this moment that they see the person is actually a centaur, a creature half horse, half human. Before she introduces herself, Blade recognizes her by the name Dione, and when she almost calls him a great hero, the boy puts his hand over her mouth and explains that it's a secret. Ernest realizes that these two know each other, so Blade tries to disguise it, but he's not very smooth with words. The centaur, once again almost letting the truth slip, explains that she has known the boy for a long time. As it's getting risky, Blade changes the subject to talk about unblocking the cart, so the whole group decides to help her. However, by coincidence, her destination is also Rosewood Academy, specifically for the king, whom she treats with great respect. Then the man says that there is another mission for her, but this time it's inside the academy. The king appoints her as a new instructor. The young ones think this is very sudden, but the man knows her abilities and that the centaur is highly qualified for this position. Dione says she counts on Blade's help, and once again, she almost calls him a great hero, so the boy doesn't know if this will work. After that, she goes to the arena where the advanced class sees the new instructor in action. With a lance in hand, she faces several giant cubes made of a material known as divine iron. Dione prepares herself and starts moving at high speed, with the tip of the lance turning red until it hits the first cube, creating a giant hole with the attack while the centaur comes out on the other side of the hole. This impresses all the students, but doesn't stop there. In a short time, Dione goes through several other cubes in the same way. At this moment, Sophie comments that divine iron should be indestructible. Blade agrees that it normally is, but in any case, the centaur isn't destroying the objects, she's melting them. She continues with the demonstration until she finishes with all the cubes in the area. All of this was just a warm-up, so she says that now the class can begin. Most of the students are speechless, but Blade and the girls ask the instructor to introduce herself. She introduces herself as Dione the Demon Lance and says that if anyone feels confident, they can draw their sword and fight her. Upon hearing this, Blade says that she isn't here for a duel. Upon recognizing the title of Demon Lance, Ernest understands that this centaur is General Dione, commander of the most powerful cavalry unit. The other students find it incredible that they are being trained by someone as important as this true hero. Dione humbly says that she can't compare to the power of the great hero, so Ernest asks if she has ever seen the great hero in action and finds it strange that someone like her knows Blade. The next day, we see Ernest and Blade discussing this new instructor. When the redhead suggests bringing her a gift, the boy says that she likes cabbage. At this moment, the girl asks about his relationship with her, but before he can answer, a giant flying creature called a simmer appears hovering over the city. Blade doesn't recognize this type of creature, so Ernest explains that it's one of the 4 sacred continental birds. With this description, the guy understands that it's like a thunderbird or a phoenix. What Ernest doesn't know is why this sacred bird is in the royal capital. However, Blade isn't worried because he thinks the bird won't attack anyone if it's not provoked. The redhead agrees because there are no records of attacks against humans. However, out of nowhere, the creature descends in an attack, giving Blade just enough time to move Ernest out of the way as the Simurgh destroys a cart with its paws. The girl thinks about stopping the creature, but Blade doesn't allow it. Then the bird takes flight again and joins another Simurgh in the sky. Ernest finds all of this very strange, and while checking the destroyed cart, Blade theorizes that this has something to do with a certain fool. This fool, as he says, is the kingdom's own majesty. We see him observing the sacred birds in the distance in the sky. After that, we see Ernest going to the director's office completely impatient and calling him to talk. The man seems calm, but the girl quickly asks what he was hiding. She presses him to tell her what's happening because the city is under attack. First, the king asks why they think this has something to do with him. So Blade mentions that the Simurgh attacked a transport cart and reminds him that Dione was also pulling a transport cart. Therefore, the girl asks what was in that cart. With that, he finally reveals that there was an egg. Ernest complains that he stole a Simurgh egg, but the director says not to accuse him like that because it wasn't theft. He says he only borrowed it for a while. In any case, the redhead says that the parents are furious because of this. The blonde in the room says that the king should explain this situation, so he reveals that there are two necessary conditions for a Simurgh egg to hatch. One is to maintain the same height as the 10,000-year-old sacred tree. The second is to be bathed in the light of the setting sun at the moment of hatching. However, it seems these parents have never made a nest before and chose a bad place for the nest, meaning the egg won't hatch under these conditions. With this, Ernest understands that the guy was trying to help, but he says that this would be the pretext. But the fact is that he thought this could be good practical training for the students. He says it's true that the egg won't hatch under the current conditions, so they need to find a way to save this Simurgh. The problem is that the hatching will happen the next day. We then see Ernest and Blade addressing the students on the following day, explaining that they will have to fight against two Simurghs. But the goal is not to win, but to buy time until sunset, while hiding the egg from the parents. The biggest problem is that the parents are agitated and might break the egg on impulse, so they will keep the egg hidden until the last moment and then lift it up in an elevator to the top of the tower to ensure it hatches safely. After this explanation, Claire shows that she isn't very confident in herself. In any case, Blade says it's okay because he trusts all his classmates. Sometime later, we see the Simurghs flying, and one of them, the one with blue feathers, swoops down to grab a cart but releases it shortly afterward. The good news is that there are no civilians nearby because the district has already been evacuated. Now Leonard springs into action and activates his magic lance, then climbs the wall like Naruto, while Yennefer ascends imitating Batman. The problem is that the blonde guy can't reach the bird with the lance's thrust and ends up falling to the ground. The Simurgh returns to try to attack the girl on the roof, but a student named Clay appears to defend his friend. Unfortunately, neither of them is strong enough to confront the bird, so they start running. Next, Blade leads a team to take the opportunity to launch several hooks and tether the Simurgh with divine iron cables also attached to the surrounding buildings. Everything seems fine until the bird starts climbing, pulling up the buildings and everything else. Meanwhile, the other Simurgh comes into action. Cuchulainn fires some shots of fire, but they have no effect and the sacred bird easily knocks her down. At this moment, Blade helps Maria transform into Mao, who takes control and unleashes a lightning attack, but it's still not enough to stop the creature. Ernest has already summoned the power of Asmodeus' demonic form and fires a powerful shot of fire that drains all his energy at once. Fortunately for her, she falls near the bucket pudding shop and replenishes the calories to reactivate the transformation. Almost everything is going well, but at the crucial moment the elevator stops. To make matters worse, one of the birds notices the egg. Sophie tells Blade to grab the egg while Clay says they will handle things in the meantime. This situation reminds the boy of his time as a great hero, when his companion said similar things. Ernest tells him to trust his friends, so the boy runs along the wall, also similar to Naruto, but almost falling because at the moment he can't use more than 15% of his power. To help, Dione also climbs the tower wall, offering to carry the boy. She says that the king ordered her not to help, but this is just a ride. When Blade says that he was told to move forward, reminiscent of that time, the woman tells him that he is no longer alone. This is different from when he fought against the Demon King, because this time he has a bunch of friends, including Dione herself. When they reach the egg, Blade has a lot of difficulty in lifting the object, so the centaur stands behind him and gives him a little push, helping him to carry the egg to the top of the tower, where the king is already waiting for them. He congratulates the great hero, but Blade acts modest, saying he had the help of everyone. Unfortunately, the moment is interrupted by the other Simurgh, which is now approaching the top. So the king decides to act, introducing himself with open arms as Gilgamesh Soulmaker and saying that one life will be paid for with another life. The blonde then tells the story of how a Simurgh saved the king's life in the past. While the man continues his speech, the woman says that it has remained in his mind until he can finally repay the debt. She thanks Blade, but the boy says the king should have been sincere and told them from the beginning. The problem is that the sacred bird is furious and attacks the king, almost knocking over the egg. At this moment, Sophie appears and uses a power to temporarily paralyze the bird, giving the boy time to use the Dragon Eater attack, forming several dragon-shaped gusts of wind. The attack is indeed powerful but leaves the guy exhausted. As the sun sets, the egg starts to shake and crack until two birds emerge from the shell. The problem is that when they see the boy, the birds recognize him as their father, meaning Cuchulainn has gained two siblings. The good part is that after the birds learn to fly, they take Blade and Ernest for a ride through the sky, with the parents much calmer now. The poor redhead is terrified because the bird is swaying a lot, but Blade is extremely happy because he keeps making new friends. Suddenly, within a castle, we see Blade advancing slowly with a blood-stained sword after defeating various different enemies. The guy keeps moving until he encounters Sophie, who says she's always wanted to fight him for real. She wonders if she can win by using all of her strength, so they decide to find out. The first thing the girl does is use the power to stop time, and with that, she lands several blows in succession on him. When time returns to normal, Sophie is tired from using this ability, but the guy is fine. He says that even if the girl attacks him 100 times, if each attack causes 0 damage, the total will still be 0. Next, he corners her, and a glow emanates from his body. Blade explains that he used the diamond body technique, which temporarily increases the hardness of his body, but since the girl stopped time, the technique remained active throughout all the attacks. After that, he finishes her off with his sword. With the girl on the ground, along with all the others Blade had defeated before, he comments that he's just an ordinary citizen and thought he wouldn't have to do this anymore. Then the guy gets up and draws the king's attention to finish this simulation, addressing him as Old Man. As expected, none of what happened was real. Blade thinks it was some kind of illusion magic, but through a holographic screen, the director explains that this is just a technology known as virtual reality, created using a science that is a lost branch of magic. He also says that this greatly helps in training because students can fight without holding back, as there is no danger of hurting each other. This equates to practical training with no restrictions. However, Blade doesn't like how realistic it is, as it could make someone return to reality thinking they are still in training and end up attacking friends. The king agrees that this could be a problem, so he changes the scenario to something much more fantastical to make it clear that this is just a simulation. As a result, he acknowledges the training and offers a reward. The last one standing in this simulation gets the right to use virtual reality as they please. We then see Leonard attempting to face Ernest. It's clear that the blonde guy doesn't stand a chance, but the redhead is completely crazy, delivering blows with a macabre smile on her face as if possessed by an evil entity. After being hit several times, the guy disappears from the simulation, and now Ernest goes in search of Blade. Meanwhile, he passes by a minor battle taking place. Jessica and Claire are fighting against Clay and another guy. The boys are winning and they boast because this duo has never beaten them during training. However, the girls are more determined than ever now, and Jessica defeats one of them in the blink of an eye. Claire takes advantage of Clay being distracted by his friend's defeat and takes him down in a single strike, securing the girls' victory. It's at this moment that Ernest appears and finds Blade on the other side. She says she never thought it would be so much fun to eliminate people and was foolish to hold back for so long. Blade recalls that he promised to stop her if she lost her head. Then the battle begins, but Blade makes several sword moves in succession, creating waves all around him. Suddenly, he wakes up on the ground with an electrode connected to his head, and the other young people are looking at him. The boy introduces himself as Blade, somewhat confused by the situation, but that last ability defeated everyone who was still in the simulation. So Blade was indeed the last one standing in this training. Surprise! Ernest is embarrassed by her behavior, and to make matters worse, Blade comments that she was indeed laughing like a mad woman. This only frustrates the girl, and she yells at the boy for being so powerful. The king finds all of this very amusing and is delighted with the idea of using virtual reality technology. However, the students are not pleased, especially Ernest, who comments on the ordeal they went through because of this idea. Since Blade won the challenge, he starts manipulating the control device. The director acknowledges that the guy is adding data of violent demons scattered throughout the scenario and traps on the ground. He asks if these settings are too advanced even for Blade, but he says it's fine and promptly places the electrode on the director, who falls to the ground. Furthermore, he asks the girl to activate the respawn configuration. This punishment will be in effect until nightfall. Next, the students prepare for lunch while Clay and his friend Cassim remain pensive in a corner. Meanwhile, the king is being terrorized by demons in the simulation. During lunch, Ernest asks what's going on with Clay and Cassim, so Blade explains that they lost a battle against the girls. He mentions that the girls won because Claire has improved significantly in combat and Yennefer was daring with a reckless attack. In addition, the boys got complacent due to their strength and let their pride get to their heads, so they didn't train enough. Since Blade doesn't mince words, the poor guys are even more affected by the situation and leave thoughtfully, but Blade says it's for their own good. Sometime later, Blade and the girls encounter Dio near some giant rocks. She's holding a pickaxe. It seems a therme was built in this place. Blade doesn't know what that is, so Eliza appears to explain, although no one remembers who this girl is. To make it clear, Dion decides to show them what it is and leads them to the new Terme Rosewood. It's like an artificially made hot spring. Everyone then takes the opportunity to relax at the location. Even Maria shows up, but she has no intention of switching to Mao because she knows that this personality would want to take off her bikini. Later, Yennefer and Claire go to Clay and Cassim to talk to them about the battle they won. The boys think they have little power, but Claire says the opposite, that they are more powerful than they are. However, this only frustrates the guys even more, and Ernest and Blade realize that the girls are just worsening their morale. To top it off, Claire apologizes for winning, which is the worst thing she could have said, making the boys cry and run away. Later on, Blade has a snack with the duo and discusses the situation. They mention that Blade has never lost to a girl, or rather to anyone, so it's hard for them to understand what they're going through. The biggest problem for Clay was losing to Jessica, the girl he likes. The problem is that Blade doesn't understand what they mean by liking, and he ends up saying that he likes her too, just like the other girls, boys, and all his friends. The duo tells him they mean something else. Cassim reveals that he likes Claire and appreciates her gentle demeanor. They go on to discuss the qualities they admire most in these girls when suddenly Cuchulainn enters through the window, showing that she overheard what they just said. The dragon girl says that if that's bothering them, the solution is simple. They just need to get stronger. Speaking like a dragon, she says that females are attracted to strong males, so they just need to become stronger to make the girls fall in love with them. The guys believe what she says and ask what they should do to become stronger. She tells them they only need special training with her father, Blade. Meanwhile, the girls enjoy some sweets and cakes and end up discussing the guys. Yennefer says it's becoming a big problem because the guys are avoiding them after losing just once, which shouldn't be a reason for them to act this way. Claire comes up with the idea of deliberately losing to them. Sophie suggests they shouldn't do that, and Ernest agrees. When Claire asks what they should do about it, Cuchulainn suddenly appears in this room just as she did in the boys' room and says the solution is simple. The dragon girl explains that males are attracted to strong females, so they just need to become stronger to make the guys fall for them. However, unlike the guys, these girls don't want the guys to fall in love with them as they don't see them in that way. Claire thinks about stopping training to let the guys catch up to them, but Ernest quickly dismisses that idea and thinks of a better solution. The next day, Clay and Cassim start training with Blade, who has them do heavy weightlifting, starting with upside-down push-ups, then roller compressor lifts, and then some strange exercises like sword handling while hanging from a cliff, and even some bizarre form of calousing. The next time the guys pass by the girls, they don't even look at them because they are so focused. Time passes until the next simulated training session and virtual reality arrives. The guys prepare to put on the electrodes and comment that if they win, they will finally declare their love for these girls. In virtual reality, all the students in the advanced class are waiting for the big battle to begin, curious about the outcome. The two duos stand face to face until Blade and Ernest appear. The redhead says that no matter who wins, they shouldn't hold a grudge. Blade tells them to prepare, and after stepping back with Ernest, he announces the start of the battle. Yennefer and Claire decide to go on the attack, so the guys prepare to retaliate. Yennefer takes the lead, showing considerable agility and passing by Clay without much trouble. But when Claire approaches, he manages to engage in a contest with her, while Cassim defends against Yennefer's attack. With the 4 in a strength contest, the guys activate their powers simultaneously, causing their blades to shine. Clay's sword turns red, while Cassim's knives turn green. With this, they manage to push the girls away. Seeing this, Ernest asks if Blade taught them how to use the fighting spirit, but he says he only made the two of them realize the fighting spirit they already subconsciously used. Furthermore, Cassim manages to use the spiritual energy of the wind. This technique allows Yennefer to ascend into the air while Clay prepares for an aerial attack. However, Yennefer uses the spiritual energy of fire. Blade questions Claire about this, and she says she only taught her the fire part. Claire then shows that she can also use the fighting spirit, hitting Cassim so hard that he loses immediately. Yennefer goes even further, using the spiritual energies to freeze Clay, leaving him vulnerable for a lightning attack, finishing the battle and securing another victory for the girls. Fortunately, the guys take the defeat well this time and congratulate the girls on their victory, thanking them for not going easy on them. This motivates the guys to become even stronger, It's revealed that Sophie and Maria taught the girls how to use the spiritual energies of ice and thunder. The guys comment that it was a bit unfair for all of them to turn against them, but Ernest says there's nothing unfair about it since they had Blade's help, who is basically a superorganism. She also asks them if it's really wrong to fall in love with someone without being stronger than that person, as in her case, which we know she's talking about Blade. Sometime after the issue with the boys had been resolved, we see the girls interacting with a little robot, and they all find it very cute, especially Claire. Ernest appears and asks about it, and Sophie explains that the robot has been at the academy for about a week. When asked if it's waiting for someone, the robot displays a hologram of Bald. Speaking of the boy, he is in the training center, concentrated when Cuchulain launches a surprise attack, but is repelled by his aura. Blade explains about the information regarding using only 15% of his power, so he needs to regularly train his fighting spirit. Suddenly, the girls appear, and when they see the robot, the guy instantly destroys it with the Dragon Eater attack, which also destroys the sword. Ernest scolds him, but Blade says that this kind of thing needs to be destroyed. While they talk, the little robot analyzes the redhead's body. The boy explains that this is a guardian, and even though the girls feel sorry for it, he says that this thing can be destroyed multiple times. The robot finishes an update, and like any creature in this anime, it reforms in the shape of a girl. But this time, there's an explanation. She said she analyzed the mind of the human male and chose an appearance that would appeal to their instincts, though we know that Blade has a childish mind and doesn't care about such things. As the robot girl prepares to attack, the boy doesn't waste time and uses Dragon Eater multiple times in a row. Ernest scolds him for not showing any mercy to the girl, but as he mentioned earlier, she quickly regenerates. When Blade wants to put an end to it, Ernest says he doesn't sense any danger from the android and that maybe she just wants to be friends. However, the guy says that guardians are always a problem. Then the android says she received an order to eliminate Blade, but is currently in observation mode to collect information. Out of nowhere, Claire invites her to come along to class, even though the robot girl says she wasn't programmed for collaborative tasks and that she must eliminate anyone who gets in the way of her goal. Therefore, Claire still thinks she can learn something from the group and calls her Iona based on her model code, which is 10NA anyway. Since she doesn't have a name, Claire decides to keep using Iona to refer to her and finally suggests that they can plan together on how to defeat Blade. So everyone joins Eliza in the classroom to discuss ways to defeat Blade. When asked why Blade is her target, Iona says he forcefully invaded a place precious to her and embarrassed her with repeated penetrations. Without malice, she's referring to the attacks during their fight. Blade then explains what happened. He forcibly entered the Royal Library of Forbidden Books located in the basement, which was shown at the beginning. And he did it to research Ernest's Asmodeus, but Iona reveals that he had already invaded the place 13 times before that, and she had been destroyed by him 28 times. In his defense, Blade says she attacked first, so he was forced to retaliate. The girls comment that this is quite cruel, so he decides to leave the room. In the hallway, Sophie goes to talk to him, and he explains that he did it because of his duties as a great hero, and that besides, guardians keep their souls in a different place, so they don't die when their bodies are destroyed. However, when Sophie asks what he would do if the robots died, Blade says he would be indecisive. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Eliza says that Blade doesn't hesitate to destroy Iona precisely because she can't die. Discussing how cold the guy can be in this regard, they also talk about his kind side. Then Iona reveals that she chose her current appearance because it seems to be more appealing to girls. Ernest and Claire find it cute, but getting back to the point, Eliza develops a strategy called the standalone complex. Basically, she wants to put Iona's soul directly into the core of her body so that the robot girl can be destroyed. The question is whether Blade will be able to attack Iona knowing that she's no longer indestructible. As a result, a battle is scheduled with an audience. Cuchulain is cheering for her father, while the rest of the girls are cheering for Iona. Before the fight begins, she warns Blade that she's in stand-alone mode, explaining that she no longer has a connection to the mother, which is basically the central computer. In other words, if she's destroyed, she can't recover. She also grabs his hand and explains where her soul and heart are located, and if they're destroyed, she'll cease to exist as an individual unit. With that, the battle begins, and this time, Iona starts attacking. She lands several blows and sends the boy flying. When he prepares a Dragon Eater attack, Iona exposes herself to the attack, so Blade drops his sword and releases a Wind Hadouken. Since that isn't enough to defeat her, the robot girl continues to attack, and after several more blows, she throws him to the ground and delivers a powerful strike with both hands, creating a crater beneath them. The girls celebrate because she's dominating the fight, while the Guardian tells Blade that she knows it's not in his nature to use violence against an innocent girl. In other words, he was defeated because his attacks are too powerful. However, the boy insists that she also deserves credit for not giving him a chance to use weaker attacks. With that, Blade surrenders and admits defeat, and the entire audience celebrates. At lunchtime, despite being able to absorb energy from organic matter, the robot girl doesn't seem to be hungry. In reality, she appears a bit depressed, so as others ask what's wrong, she mentions the lack of purpose after defeating Blade. Usually, after completing a mission, Iona returns to the mother to receive new instructions, but even after restoring the connection, Mother continues to refuse her return. It's as if she had been fired for neglecting her duties and deliberately blocking the connection, in addition to sending 15 terabytes of insults to Mother. Now that a higher entity, Iona feels insecure and asks Blade to become her new master, primarily to stop the self-destruct countdown, which is meant to prevent a Guardian unit from going into Berserker mode without a chain of command. At the moment, the countdown is still over 303,000 seconds, giving them more than 3 days. To prevent her destruction, Blade finally agrees to become Iona's master. After that, she starts serving him wearing a maid outfit. As she always waits for orders, Blade begins to feel like he's losing his freedom. Suddenly, Sophie appears, saying she's dissatisfied because Iona is taking on her personality, like having an expressionless face and constantly waiting for orders. Moreover, she's jealous because Blade is giving orders to Iona and not to her. This starts a competition to see who deserves to receive orders from Blade more. The next day, they show up somewhat dressed up, Sophie with cat ears and Iona with rabbit ears. Their first challenge is a staring contest, which escalates into an unarmed combat during training. As they don't reach a conclusion, they end up activating their powers, so Blade scolds both of them because it was supposed to be an unarmed combat and both are disqualified. They continue trying to prove themselves to Blade, even going so far as to watch over him while he sleeps. As he sleeps, they talk about who will come out victorious in this competition. Regarding sleep, Sophie has a focus training that allows her to go up to 7 days without sleep, while Iona logically doesn't need any rest. Suddenly, they start talking about their similarities. The android has always felt lonely and practically only Blade would visit her. Sophie also spent a long time alone in a dark laboratory cage, with her only connection to the world being her resemblance to Blade. Finally, Iona says that Sophie has become special to her as well, while the artificial heroine thinks she's actually having fun competing with the Guardian. This situation marks the beginning of a friendship between the two, and Blade, who pretended to be asleep, is happy to hear this conversation. The next day, they show themselves to be friendly towards each other, and even Ernest notices it. However, Blade asks to see the self-destruct countdown, and everyone realizes it's still decreasing. Iona says it did have some effect because the countdown speed has been reduced. Eliza speculates that this might be because the master is a human, and she calculates that the robot girl still has over 20 hours left until the countdown reaches 0. With not much else to do, Iona says she wants to be with her friends until the last moment and then be alone to avoid causing harm to anyone nearby. It's a tense situation, but the students start a party, which they call Let's Bid Farewell to Iona with a smile. While she feels insecure, Sophie tells the android that everyone is trying to fulfill her wish, and she should also try to enjoy this time to the fullest. She also says it's not an order. Sophie said it as a friend. So, everyone continues celebrating with games and food. The problem is that Blade has disappeared and no one can find him. Meanwhile, Iona's countdown is getting closer to 0. She creates a barrier while everyone gathers and Sophie approaches. The Guardian thanks them for what they've done and mentions the senselessness of accumulating a small amount of data in memory before being eliminated. However, through her interactions with these friends, she understands it better now and for the first time, feels capable of understanding humans. The android also says that it's thanks to Sophie that she has become more than just a machine and has become a real human in a way. Finally, Iona talks about what each of these friendships has meant to her and admits that she's afraid and doesn't want to disappear. She asks for their help and not to forget her. They all promise not to forget her and prepare for the final moment. However, the countdown stops at 1. Suddenly, Blade appears, opening a hole in the ground near Ernest, tearing part of her clothes. The redhead asks where he was, and the boy explains that he went to Mother to convince her to restore the connection. It sounds very noble, but he also used some brute force to do it. Iona confirms that the connection has indeed been restored, so the self-destruction program is currently deactivated. Everyone celebrates, and then the android grabs Blade, knocking him to the ground, completely overwhelmed. Seeing this, Ernest gets jealous and tells her to get off him, but the Guardian doesn't seem to be listening. One day, a special training session begins at Rosewood Academy called the Battle Royale. It's an exercise where all the students showcase their skills against each other, or at least it should have been that way if it weren't for Blade defeating everyone on his own. At the moment, the only one still standing is Leonard, who's still willing to fight. The other students show their support, wanting him to avenge the class. Blade asks why everyone is against him, and Iona responds with the obvious, that it's because everyone was defeated by him. However, He says that this outcome was to be expected. As he prepares for a one-on-one battle with Leonard declares that he will bring victory to the name of Ernest. While the others cheer for him, the redhead isn't paying attention and is surprised that he hasn't been defeated yet, asking why he is still standing. Claire then comments that Blade is the type to save the boring and less exciting part for last. These comments destroy the guy's self-esteem. As expected, the blonde guy tries to attack, but he is defeated without any effort by Blade. The rest of the class leaves, saying they didn't expect a different outcome. While Leonard thinks he still has the support of Ernest, the girl happily runs off because she can finally go eat now that the training is over. Blade calls Leonard to join him for a meal, and while Leonard comments that he's no match for him, Maria watches this interaction from a distance. Later, Leonard reflects on his classmate, knowing that it was no secret that Blade had always been the strongest. However, he imagines that he could impress Ernest if he defeated this guy. When he wonders if he could defeat him in some way, the blonde guy decides not to waste any more time and goes to a forge to repair his weapon. The next day, Maria approaches him to talk about the problem of defeating Blade and how Leonard keeps laughing even when he loses. She asks if he doesn't care about it, and Leonard says she wouldn't understand. The girl confirms that she wouldn't and says she doesn't want to be behind Blade but beside him because losing is frustrating. But she thinks she has never really faced him, so she swears that one day she will be able to stand beside him with her own ability. Leonard begins to think that she might have some romantic interest, but Maria denies it, saying it's more like what Mao says about her being the one to eliminate Blade as a declaration of rivalry. With that, the blonde guy asks if she really wants to eliminate Blade, and again, the girl says it's not that. She explains that when she saw him admit to being inferior to Blade, saying he couldn't match him, and in no way giving up on the desire to catch up to him and defeat him, she couldn't ignore it. When Leonard thanks her, and they promise to support each other, Eliza suddenly appears, saying that just supporting like it's some silly idealism won't get them anywhere. She asks if they think they can defeat the superorganism that way. Leonard admits they can't, so the girl offers to help them defeat him with a realistic plan instead of idealism. They thank her but still show that they don't remember who this girl is. So the three of them call the rest of the class and form a superorganism suppression committee. Leonard speaks as the president. When Ernest questions this title, Eliza counters by asking why she's in this meeting. However, everyone has their reasons for wanting to defeat Blade. Leonard speaks again, trying to sound sophisticated, but Ernest cuts him off, not understanding the purpose, making the boy feel overwhelmed by the lack of empathy from the Empress. Then he says that even though they have different motivations, everyone in this meeting wants to defeat Blade. Everyone except Sophie, who says she doesn't care. The blonde guy then asks if anyone has a concrete plan. Claire and Jessica suggest attacking Blade while he sleeps or poisoning him. Ernest thinks these ideas are cowardly, so Lisa says that cowardice is Blade being a superorganism while they, as fragile humans, are trying to face this extraordinary opponent, so it's natural that they try to use any method available. In turn, the Empress says she prefers to defeat him fairly and suggests challenging him to duels with weapons he's not accustomed to. Claire questions how this method is different from attacking while he sleeps or poisoning him, as it puts him at a disadvantage. To cover for the redhead, Leonard says she means that each of them should face Blade in the way they see fit, and to avoid being judged, the Empress confirms that was indeed what she meant. Therefore, the boy says that at this moment, the committee declares the oath to defeat Blade and achieve victory at any cost. Ernest is the first to try, challenging him to a battle using spears and using Leonard's spear, which she borrowed. However, Blade effortlessly defeats her and even destroys Leonard's newly repaired spear in the process. The second is Yennefer, who decides to sneak into Blade's room while he sleeps, but she didn't expect Evona to be on guard, attacking her instantly. Yennefer says she thought they were allies, but the Guardian explains that it was an automatic function. Now it's Leonard's turn to face him using the patched-up spear, but of course, when he activates the attack function, the weapon shatters completely. After that, Maria waits for an opening in the cafeteria, and when Blade is vulnerable with his back turned, she switches to Mao. Instead of attacking immediately, she starts a Demon King speech, saying that the boy forgot that she was going to eliminate him, but before finishing the presentation, he simply kicks her in the face without even looking. Maria scolds Mao for talking too much. Sophie tries to face Blade in unearned combat, but is defeated with a single blow. Claire tries to attack irregularly and ends up falling on her own, although I thought she would try to use poison. Clay, along with Kasim, tries to distract Blade by talking about naked girls, but they should have known that this kind of distraction wouldn't catch Blade's attention. When Kushalin tries an attack, he gets distracted by the food he offers him like a father. After that, the attempts to defeat Blade become increasingly absurd, like rock, paper, scissors, endurance competitions for heat, cold, and block weight, until by this point, the committee has practically forgotten their initial objective. This leaves Leonard demotivated, but Ernest still says she wants to defeat him, beating him to the point of making him admit that she is strong and ask for mercy. Leonard talks about the journey to overcome Blade, which may be more important than victory itself, but Ernest says that none of that matters if you can't win. Regarding the expression ask for mercy, Ivana comments that it would be the same as recognizing defeat, so she remembers that it was possible when the boys surrendered in the battle against her. The issue is that to make Blade admit defeat, the strategy was to use the life of the Guardian as a hostage, so what the committee needs now is to use hostages again. Leonard was initially excited about the possibility of making the boys surrender, but with the part about needing hostages, he becomes reluctant. Nevertheless, since Ernest wants to defeat him at all costs, she ends up forcing Leonard to collaborate with this kind of plan. With that said, during a medicine class, Blade realizes that Leonard and the other boys in the class haven't shown up. The girls try to disguise it with poor excuses until the boys show up wearing monster masks and carrying swords. They say they have taken control of the place. Blade is not understanding what's going on, so Ernest says they are terrorists. He doesn't know what that word means, so Sophie explains that terrorists are people who use violence for political purposes. Since he still doesn't get it, Ernest simplifies it by saying that they are selfish and violent. The teacher is also confused, so the boys say they have a reason for it and ask her to cooperate. They usher the other students out and Blade prepares to leave, but Ernest says he can't because they have taken the teacher as a hostage. Following the script, the woman starts calling for help in a somewhat suggestive manner. Seeing this, the girls start wanting to be taken hostage instead of her, kind of forgetting that there was a plan in progress. While this senseless discussion continues, the teacher decides to walk away. So Matt wants Ernest to become the hostage, but as she calls for help, Blade questions what the word hostage means. The dragon girl thinks it means non-perishable food, so Blade's thought process is that the terrorists showed up to use violence to achieve their political goals. And for that, they made the girls hostages to use as non-perishable food. It makes perfect sense. Still, he doesn't understand anything. Ernest calls him an idiot and tells him to take it seriously because she's in danger. Then all the girls start pretending to be hostages at the same time. Nevertheless, the boy is still not getting it until he finally directly asks the boys dressed up what they are doing and calls them by their names, revealing that he knew it was Clay, Leonard, and Cassim from the beginning. This leaves them completely frustrated. Blade still wants to know why they are making the girls hostages, and since he has the intelligence of an amoeba, they go along with a non-perishable food story. Blade then says you shouldn't try to eat your friends. Thank goodness he knows at least that much. Suddenly, Cassim starts displaying some audacity with the girls and ends up getting beaten up by them. So Clay and Leonard ask if he's not going to surrender. It turns out that Blade still has no reason to do so because even though Leonard comments on his weakness against hostages, recalling the fight against Ivana, the boy recognizes that at that time it was genuine and this time it's not the same. With few options left, Leonard decides to make Ernest a hostage again, but this time he shares a serious look as if he's taking it seriously. Everyone starts questioning what Blade will do, hoping he will surrender, but instead he uses an air pressure attack that destroys Leonard's sword, along with the clothes of him and the other boys. Now that they are disarmed, there's nothing more they can do. With the hostage plan falling apart, everyone decides to resort to their last option, attacking Blade all at once. As usual, this changes nothing with Blade defeating the entire class without breaking a sweat. When he asks what all of this was exactly, Maria says it was just a game. Blade then asks if it was good because he doesn't know the rules of the terrorist game. Believing the story, the other students comment among themselves that everything has gone downhill. One day in the cafeteria, Blade and Ernest walk past a group celebrating someone's birthday. The boy revealed that he didn't know why they were celebrating, and in fact, he didn't even know what a birthday was. Later, the redhead and the others gathered to discuss the possibility of celebrating his birthday, but Blade didn't know his own birth date, so there was no way to celebrate. Dione revealed that they didn't even know his age, as when he was found, he could already stand and walk. If you consider he was 1 year old at the time, he must be 17 now. At least knowing the day the boy was found, they could use it as a commemorative date. For this, the group would have about a month to prepare a surprise. Sophie mentioned that she heard he was holding a sword when he was found. Upon hearing this, Ernest understood why his name was Blade, which means blade in English. Claire commented that if he had been found with a spear, he would be called Lance. This kind of name became a source of jokes among the girls. However, Ernest returned to the topic of celebration. They needed to know what the guy would like to receive as a gift and suggested his favorite dish, tonkatsu curry. However, the others didn't think it was such a good idea. King Gilgamesh, who was listening to the conversation, appeared and said that this dish would be the perfect gift as everyone loved it, even though it was a common dish in the cafeteria. The point was that the food didn't need to be ordinary. They could prepare a special royal tonkatsu curry. With this in mind, the director took all the students to the royal pantry, which was a source of pride for the kingdom. When the pantry door opened, it revealed a massive space, so large it seemed like an outdoor area with its own ecosystem, even though it was underground. Some speculated that it might be some ancient magic that expanded the space, and it was also clear that the place they had entered was just a shed. The king's excuse was that the students would undergo a special practical training, and the exit doors would only open when the conditions were met. The challenge was for them to consume a combined total of 11.3 billion kilocalories, about 100 million per student. Dione mentioned that there were preserved ingredients in this pantry from the time of the gods. In reality, the animals and plants in this place were quite aggressive and roamed freely, so this task would also help control the excess. Blade knew that this was a task for heroic-level warriors, but Ernest and the others were fine with the challenge, so they advanced to start. They set up a camp and put on primitive clothing. Yennefer acted as bait to attract a beast, but it got distracted and went after Claire instead. Leonard tried to help but was thrown aside, so Mao quickly dealt with the creature. Over time, the camp became larger and more advanced as the students used various survival techniques. The only ones not wearing primitive clothes were Blade, Cuchulainn, and the android. Later, Blade took a thermal bath to relax. Ernest also went to the hot spring but asked him not to look. Blade complied because he had no interest in spying. With this, she took the opportunity to ask if he had ever celebrated anything in his childhood. Blade said he spent 24 hours a day fighting. The wreck had initially thought he was training to become stronger, but he explained that it was more a matter of survival. Becoming stronger was a necessity. Blade spoke about these things very naturally. When Ernest tried to get a little closer to him, Claire suddenly appeared out of nowhere and pulled her away from him, preventing a more intimate interaction. This left the redhead embarrassed as she realized that she and Yennefer had been watching from a distance. Gradually, even the students' primitive clothing was improved, until they had consumed almost half of the calorie target. According to Iona, they would achieve the goal within the deadline. However, Jill appeared and set a new goal. Recognizing the students' growth, he said that the initial task was too easy, so the new challenge was to gather a list of ingredients marked on scrolls. The first ingredient they found was a cabbage with a weird mouth that used tentacles to attack Ernest. She and Blade cut off several of the tentacles, and when she decided to use her firepower, Sophie warned that they needed the ingredient raw. So they all attacked together, and Blade noticed that everyone was very excited. Next, they encountered a boxing corn, and to defeat this creature, they couldn't use a weapon, or the taste of the ingredient would be ruined. Blade ended up having to wear boxing gloves and follow the rules of the sport to face this corn. Since it was a fistfight, he asked if Sophie could go in his place, but substitutions were not allowed. The battle began and he was immediately hit by a powerful punch, but he countered and the fight continued without many problems. Then they found various other types of ingredients being collected, such as giant tomatoes and super spicy peppers that even made the robot girl tear up from the heat. Cuchulainn found a field of sunflowers that suddenly began to emit light and shoot beams of light. Eliza explained that these flowers had the ability to store sunlight and release it as an attack. Since Mao and Cuchulainn were very strong, they had no trouble dealing with this problem. In the meantime, Blade's team found some giant buried carrots called greater mandoras. Blade moved forward to pull one out, but it screamed like the mandrakes in Harry Potter. The scroll's description said that the greater mandora screams when pulled, and this could become a lethal curse. So Iona, being human, went ahead to collect them because these curses didn't affect living organisms. Iona pulled out the mandoras and the noise bothered everyone else, but at a safe distance. No one was in danger, only the ecosystem around it suffered some damage. Sometime later, with the sun almost setting, this group returned to the campsite by flying, using the vegetables as seats while the Simmer chicks carried everything. Blade revealed that he didn't like carrots, but he didn't mind eating them when they were used in a recipe. At night, the director praised the students' performance so far, saying that because of them, the ecosystem of the royal pantry had undergone drastic changes, making the population only 1/10 of what it was for the next few years. However, there was no risk of extinction, as it wouldn't have been so much trouble if extinction were a possibility. The king then became excited because the next day the students would go after the last ingredient, which was also the most challenging. That said, after it dawned, the group gathered near a giant tree in the area with the most energy. They were waiting for the Pantry King, a beast that inhabited this region probably because it had more nutrients due to the concentrated energy. Soon the Beast King appeared, a giant minotaur. Sophie mentioned that it was strong and had delicious meat. The king and Dione watched from a distance, enjoying the challenge the young people were facing. Blade prepared for battle, but something much larger appeared and instantly eliminated the minotaur. This new creature was a behemoth, which even King Gilgamesh didn't expect to appear. He had planned to eat beef, but behemoth meat was even better. Blade was a bit thoughtful, But the other students were even more excited than before with the prospect of having even better meat for the main dish. The boy didn't understand, but without wasting time, Ernest invoked the power of Asmodeus and led the students in an attack. Several magical and physical attacks were launched, but the creature managed to gain the upper hand in the early stages of the battle, forcing Claire to heal the wounded in the middle of the chaos. Not even the combined attacks of the most powerful girls, along with Coachelaine, were enough to defeat this giant monster. Next, the creature prepared an energy blast in retaliation, but Leonard appeared and used a divine technique called absolute defense to protect his comrades with a magical barrier. Ernest took the opportunity to lend the Asmodeus sword to Blade, who immediately explained that there was only one technique that could defeat the behemoth. Mao was already aware of what he was talking about, but knew that Blade wouldn't be able to use the technique with only 15% of the available power. He needed 30%, so Blade asked for Mao's help in this attack. First, he held her hand to share their spiritual energy. Seeing that he wanted to use her as a vessel, Mao had an idea to speed up the process and kissed him to accelerate it. Before using the technique, the other students needed to hold the creature at bay, so Sophie used increased gravity power while Iona fired a positronic cannon shot. Then the other students also joined the attack, while Mao and Blade prepared for the final strike. The boy raised the Asmodeus sword while the demon girl helped him combine their spiritual energies. Blade warned the others to step back, and the duo began reciting an incantation that generated a giant astral version of the sword. They attacked together with this technique called the Sacred Demon Sword, which struck the behemoth and split it in half. Mao recalled that this was the technique used to defeat the previous incarnation of the Demon King. Then Blade felt very tired and very hungry before losing consciousness. Sometime later, he was examined by the doctor in the infirmary. She said that he now had 3% more power that he could use without going berserk, and a routine of proper nutrition, exercise, and rest must have helped a lot in his recovery. The woman asked if he had eaten lunch, so Blade remembered that he was hungry and rushed to the cafeteria, where he was greeted by everyone wishing him a happy birthday. Ernest explained that they were celebrating the day he was taken in because no one knew his actual birth date. The boy was directed to the gift they had prepared, which was on a tray on the table. Ernest removed the cover, revealing the special tonkatsu curry. She explained that it was made with ingredients from the royal pantry, with the director's assistance. The man appeared with a smile and said it was fun. Blade became emotional because he had never experienced anything like this before. He tasted the food and remained quiet for a while. Then he mentioned that someone had said a long time ago that boys don't cry. Hearing this, the king said that tears of men exist for moments like this, and as king, he removed any previous words stating that men don't cry. With that, the boy opened up and started shedding tears. He thanked his friends for the delicious food, and for the first time, Blade felt as if he had truly been born into this world. Sometime after Blade's birthday, we see Clay practicing a new attack called Dragon Smash, which is powerful enough to damage armor from a distance. Blade and Cassim praise his performance when suddenly Sophie appears, but she's wearing darker clothes and wielding a sword. Even her scarf is a different color. Upon seeing her, the boys invite her to learn this technique. Even though she initially refuses, the guys insist, so Sophie gives it a try. She performs a Dragon Smash much more potent than Clay's, and Blade recognizes it as the true Dragon Smash. This attack shatters the armor and even tears the clothes of Clay and Cassim. While they are impressed by how easily Sophie learned this skill, another Sophie appears, this time looking like the one they know. While defending against a sword strike with her fist, the girl tells Blade that this fight is hers. Blade, who is about to draw his sword, releases the hilt and watches. At this moment, the rest of the group approaches. Mao gets the impression that it's some kind of division technique, but without any explanation, the sword-wielding Sophie uses Dragon Smash to create a distraction and then disappears. She leaps between rooftops until she reaches a remote location. There, she encounters other Sophies, each with a different personality. One is emotional, another eager to eliminate everyone, and even one asking if there were any cute girls at school. In total, there are 5 different versions of Sophie in this place, and the most serious one, who wields the sword, is named Yoon, and appears to be the group's leader. When the more melancholic one, named Chua, suggests that she must have failed the mission, Yoon allows the livelier one named Sink to teach her a lesson. Sink has gauntlets and enjoys destroying things and people, so she goes after everyone, saying she will destroy everything. While the battle unfolds, Yoon tries to explain what happened, but since it's complicated, the one interested in girls named Quacker kisses her to receive data transmitted through bodily fluids contact. Yoon does the same with Do, the one suggesting the elimination of everyone. Chua and Sink are still fighting but pause to receive the transmission kisses. Thus, they all visualize the learning of the Dragon Smash attack and quickly master it, applying it to Yoon and partially destroying the building. Finally, they comment that this wasn't their objective. They received orders to eliminate someone. The next day, the Sophie from the academy observes the other students during training. Yennefer loads ammunition into a fan and performs a powerful attack, revealing that this is a test for a prototype invention by Eliza. Blade acts as if it's no big deal, so the blonde dismisses his opinion because he's a superorganism, and it's more challenging for regular humans to accumulate fighting spirit on their own. That's why she developed these cartridges, where spirit can be deposited and activated at will. Suddenly, another quadra appears, wielding a scythe, and she's the one with intimate interests. When she mentions this to Blade, the girls become embarrassed, and Ernest scolds her for it. As a second option, Quash says she wants to eliminate Blade and launches an attack with the scythe, but he defends himself. Then they start exchanging powerful blows that create a gust of wind against the other students. Realizing she can't eliminate him, the girl asks him to teach her how to do it, but Blade isn't that crazy. So the girl grabs his hand and directs it toward her own body, asking him to finish her off. It's at this moment that the Sophie from the academy appears, but instead of confronting them, the other Sophie runs away. This reveals that this is already the fourth invading Sophie. During lunch, the students try to understand who these girls are and what they want. Nobody reaches a concrete conclusion, but another girl mentions that from an outside perspective, it seemed like they were all trying to eliminate Blade. However, Ernest points out that they also try to eliminate each other during training, and everyone in the class agrees that they do the same, especially Mao, who literally has that objective. This conversation frightens the girl, but it's only now that Ernest concludes that Blade is being attacked by assassins. Upon hearing this, the Sophie from the academy falls to the ground in shock at the fact that no one had realized this until now. However, Blade reveals that he had understood it from the beginning. Nonetheless, Sophie says she will protect him. Meanwhile, Sink is excited because she will be the next to go after Blade. They all make comments about how they can finish him off until Yoon says they are wasting energy for nothing. Suddenly, a man calls them all and says they need to show everyone a great artificial hero that can surpass even the great hero, and they need to take Blade's life to prove the research correct. Upon hearing this, all of them vanish except Yoon, who first says they already knew this, and that's why they were given life. At night in the school, Sophie enters Blade's room while he sleeps. Evan initially goes into defense mode because she didn't recognize her immediately since the girl was using a stealth mode to avoid waking him up. The Guardian recognizes that Sophie is concerned about his safety, but informs her that she is there to watch over him. Then Sophie goes to the outdoor area where Yoon appears. Sophie tells Yoon that they cannot defeat Blade, but the invader explains they were ordered to do so, and that's the purpose of their existence. Sophie replies that the artificial Great Hero Project was abandoned, and she was the last experiment. She also mentions that the modifications Yoon received didn't follow the proper procedure and must have a considerable effect on her body. Yoon acknowledges this and says that she and the others have a short life expectancy, unlike Sophie Femto. It's important to note that Femto means 12 and represents the order of the clones of the original Sophidia. With that, Sophie suggests that instead of spending their limited time following orders, they could live as humans. However, Yoon says the orders are absolute and there's only one response to those who get in the way. She draws her sword and begins an attack, but before long, Femto defends with her fists and knocks her opponent down with a strike. Then she jumps on Yoon, but before delivering the final blow, she hesitates and lets the girl go. In the next attempt to take down Blade, Sing appears and the students take her to a virtual reality arena as part of a plan. Blade comments that this Sophie seems like a little child, but she refuses to be called Sophie, saying her name is Sink. Eliza recognizes that this word means 5 in an ancient language. Blade asks if there are 5 of them in total, and Sink confirms it, but upon realizing she couldn't reveal this information, she says to forget what she said. Nevertheless, she claims she will destroy Blade and launches an attack. Everyone runs away, but Ernest tells Blade to follow the plan. So he is hit and falls headfirst to the ground. Sting takes advantage and continues to strike Blade repeatedly with her gauntlets, and he simply doesn't react until his vision goes dark. He wakes up in the real world, and the girls comment that this is the first time he has experienced death in virtual reality. That was indeed the plan. Sting left in a good mood, thinking she had defeated Blade. The problem is that it doesn't take long for her to realize she was deceived, and she returns to take Blade down. This time, he flees through the corridors with Iona, who warns him that the destruction in this building could cause a collapse, so they need to lure Sink to another building. At this moment, Du also appears to help capture Blade, but he manages to dodge her attack just in time. Next, the Guardian taunts them just to speed things up as she leads the invaders to the other building, where Ernest is waiting with other girls who seem to be magic users. They are insecure, but are told to cast their spells at the enemies without hesitation. When Blade passes by them, the girls cast their spells, but the magic does not harm the invaders. Ernest manages to send Du flying with a fire shot, but is nearly hit by an attack from Sync, saved by Blade, who also conjures a bit of fire on her, revealing that he can use some magic as well. Unfortunately, none of this is enough to neutralize the assassins. They rise and hold hands to use an ability together, creating a sort of black hole that begins to pull the students towards it, but luckily, they manage to hold on. A few seconds later, Du and Sync seem exhausted but claim it's not over. The problem is that the black hole won't disappear on its own. Some of the magical girls are almost sucked in, but Blade acts quickly enough to save them. It's at this moment that Sophie appears, standing in front of the black hole, and she concentrates her energy to neutralize the sphere, gradually pulling the concentrated power. She succeeds in neutralizing the black hole, but falls exhausted. Blade holds her, and now Yoon appears with Chua to take her companions away. The students watch as the girls leave. Later, Sophie wakes up in the infirmary, accompanied by Blade. He offers her a snack, and while she eats, she asks if there were any casualties in the confrontation. He tells her that only a few people were injured, but Claire healed everyone. Sophie apologizes for causing trouble, but Blade takes the opportunity to ask her about the other girls. The girl explains that they were all created using the same cloning technique and received some adjustments. When implanted with a rare metal called heronium, they manifested the powers of the Great Hero. It was all part of the artificial Great Hero project. Sophie was lucky to be rescued by the king, but these others received no help from anyone. Sophie's case was actually easier because she was brought to the academy and made some friends, including Blade. The guy then says he'd like to be friends with the other 5 as well, as Ernest had suggested it would be good for them to join the school before knowing they were assassins. However, Sophie says it's impossible because they were created to defeat Blade, and that's the only reason for their existence. Only this Sophie was rescued before receiving these neural modifications, so she doesn't have that programming, but the others can't go against orders. Emotionally, the girl starts to cry, and Blade gives her a hug to comfort his suffering friend. Later at night, we see Blade with his head lowered, still sitting by the bed, but there's no one lying there anymore. Sometime after the girl left, the king informed the students that Sophie had formally left the academy. Ernest complained that he hadn't stopped her, but the man explained that enrolled students have the right to receive instruction to become heroes, but they also have the freedom not to exercise that right, so the director should not prevent those who choose to leave the school. Ernest continued to hold a different opinion, but Blade showed that he was okay with the situation. Therefore, the redhead calmed down and said the class would find a way to bring Sophie back. Since she had gone after the other 5, Yennefer mentioned that during an investigation, she had found some of the possible bases of the copies. Nevertheless, the king mentioned that Sophie had decided to go alone, probably because she didn't want the other students to get their hands dirty, as the only way to stop the 5 was by eliminating all of them. He further commented that the world is not just what we see in the daylight and that Sophie originally existed in the shadows, which is why she wanted to end this story with her own hands, preventing her friends from taking the dark path as well. Finally, he advised the young ones to think carefully about it before making a decision. Before the sun rose, Blade was already determined to go after Sophie, but Iona and Cuchulainn went to him to accompany him. Mao also appeared, so the 4 of them set out, but outside they found the rest of the class saying that he had taken too long to make a decision, as they had all made up their minds much faster. Later, when Sophie found one of the bases empty, Ernest arrived flying with his Cimmer chick. Through the communicator, she notified Eliza that she had found it, so the blonde informed that she would mobilize the others. Meanwhile, Sophie already asked that no one interfere. The redhead tried to argue that everyone understood her feelings, but she said they didn't because there was something she hadn't told them. When everyone gathered, she explained that she was a human created for the Artificial Hero Project, which aimed to artificially replicate or even surpass the powers of the Great Hero, with her being the 12th subject. Everyone involved in this project should have been arrested, but it seems that some samples and research data were stolen. These 5 copies are the samples, and the person must have continued the research, incubating them and then giving them orders. The reason they exist is to surpass the Great Hero. Ernest questioned why Blade became their target, but soon, everyone concluded that it was to test their abilities, as if they couldn't surpass the superorganism, they wouldn't be able to face the Great Hero. It's such a silly conclusion that even Mao commented on how clueless these students were. Following this, Sophie began to open up, saying that her past had finally caught up with her. She wanted to know how long she could be so happy and whether an imposter human could live happily like a real person. But now she knows she needs to go back to the shadows where she belonged, and in a way, she will protect all her friends. She ended by saying that even though it was for a short time, she was happy to walk in the sunlight. Hearing this, Ernest scolded the girl, saying that it was nonsense, and if walking in the sun made her happy, she should continue doing so. The Empress herself admitted that she had a very narrow vision, but thanks to Blade, she managed to change and accept happiness. Moreover, everyone was willing to help, even if the only option was to eliminate the 5. However, Blade said they wouldn't do that because that wasn't the answer. Anyway, Sophie mentioned that these copies were programmed to follow orders, and even if there was a way to reverse that, they didn't have much time left. Despite having no idea, Blade wanted to try to save the 5, so when he convinced Sophie to let them try to help, Eliza was tasked with developing a plan. In the meantime, Yoon and the others woke up and were reminded of their goal to surpass the great hero and eliminate him. Chua and Quater, who were outside, returned with a challenge letter they received from the students, which was clearly a trap, but Yoon wanted to put an end to it. In the academy arena, Blade waited for them while the others watched from the stands. Ernest had doubts about whether they would accept the challenge, but Sophie was sure because she would accept it too. Soon the girls arrived, already saying they would defeat Blade, but he said he wished he could be friends with all 5 of them. Meanwhile, Eliza spoke through an earpiece, confirming that he would follow the plan. However, he needed to be the only one to fight because if the others also attacked, the girls would escape, but having him as the sole target, they would persist even knowing it was a trap. Ernest, on the other hand, felt bad for not being able to help. The fight began while Eliza continued to recall the plan. The goal was not to defeat the girls, but to drain their energy. So Blade basically tried to withstand their attacks, but of course, it wasn't an easy task. Meanwhile, the King Gilgamesh was very happy because there was no more realistic practical training than a real mission. Eliza's plan was to keep the girls occupied to try to intercept their orders and capture the person responsible to extract the parameters needed to reprogram and save the girls. Blade continued the fight, and when it seemed like he was about to be hit by all 5 of them, Ernest became even more worried, but Sophie told her to trust him. And indeed, he showed good performance, using defensive techniques like Leonard's, but he was gradually getting tired. The redheads still felt bad about just watching, but Claire and Yennefer said there was still something they could do. Meanwhile, Du used the power of artificial hero to control gravity in an unexpected way for Blade, making him fall in various directions before being dropped from a height to the ground. But the girl also ran out of energy. Next, Quadra created several copies of herself and attacked together. It was at this moment that Yennefer threw a combat spirit capsule to Blade, and he activated the power with his sword, releasing a burst of energy that eliminated almost all the replicas. Then Clay threw another capsule, and this time he used the Dragon Smash, finishing off the remaining replicas and leaving Quattro exhausted. The next one was Chua, who activated a powerful artificial hero power to launch a very potent attack, but before she reached him, Leonard threw a capsule that Blade used to create an unbreakable barrier, Leonard's most powerful technique. Since he had used all this power in that attack, Chua also fell while Blade's sword shattered. The next attacker was Sink, so Blade asked for Ernest's capsule. Although unsure, she threw it, but before he could catch it, Sink continued her attack, causing him to drop the object on the ground to dodge the attacks. Seeing this, Sophie used her own power as a great artificial hero to teleport, pick up the capsule, and even save Blade from the next attack by taking him up into the air. As they ascended, Sophie transferred some of her power to Blade to use, so when Sink prepared to use her most powerful attack down below, Blade unleashed a blast of Sophie's power, colliding head-on with her power, which also ran out in the process. Before returning to the stands, Sophie handed Ernest